ultimately, being and doing are not separate. Beingness doesn't switch off because there is action. As long as we are alive as a form, as an individuated form, there is action. Yeah. Whether that's drinking, eating, sleeping, walking, and so on. Even thinking, when it's applied thinking. Yeah. Beingness is not switched off in that. Just as the ocean is not switched off when waves are waving. But when doing takes place from unconscious agitation, from the need to fill a hole of some sort, or the need to escape from discomfort or pain, when doing takes place from the need to get to a destination, whether that destination is a spiritual destination or a material destination that has to do with identity, who I am, who I think I am. And we've spoken about this in terms of the codependent relationship with life and all aspects of life, the not enoughness that drives the seeking, the unconscious egoic seeking mechanism. And the majority of humanity is driven on that level. Not all of it, yeah, but much of it is driven on that level. Then doing becomes a, if you like, hamster wheel. That eventually is exhausting on some level, exhausting mentally or emotionally or physically, and doesn't bring the fulfillment that we seek. And then there's a yearning for being. So then either something comes to an end because we need to come into a place of simplicity in life, or we seek that simplicity by whatever means, starting meditation or taking more time off work or whatever it might be. But doing that arises from enoughness, from having touched and tasted that which is always inherently here as our innate wholeness, then doing that arises from that is not in opposition to being. It is one with being. It is simply the external representation of that. Just as our body is an external representation of consciousness, so is doing an external representation of beingness. That's why it's important, if we are on this path of inquiry and deepening, to become sensitive to the obvious and less obvious, more subtle, codependent transactions we have with our everyday life. whether it's work or relationships or food or, yeah, everything. Because as we become aware of that or sensitive to it, it loses its true fulfillment. And then we have the possibility to remain in the inner silence, yeah? It's an inner silence where we wait, yeah? And I don't mean wait in terms of linear time, although it may be linear time, but there's a subtle pause which breaks that samsaric cycle of moving away from now into the agenda, into the imagination, into the future. Because a lot of doing on the unconscious level takes place, well, to fill the inner hole, the not enoughness. But there's with that comes an idea. It's often not very conscious. Sometimes it is, that if I get this, if I do this, if I, it will change my state, my emotional state, my mental state. I'll feel better. I'll be more inspired, or I'll be more successful, or I'll be more, and I'll feel differently to what is here now, the honesty of what is here now. So we're projecting into the future our state, mental state, emotional state, sometimes even physical state, our material state. So that creates a false picture in the future, which is not, that is not presence, that is not nowness, that is not here-ness, that is not the intimacy with what is. And that becomes a sort of dream that keeps on alluring us. Always the next moment will be better, even through something that we do. Yes. And I remember when, for me, on a subtle level, yes, this is when it got more and more subtle, it was reading a book. And there's nothing wrong with reading a book. I read books all the time. But reading a spiritual or inspirational or metaphysical book many, many years ago, as well as being a true enjoyment, was in the subtle place a hope, an agenda, subtle psychological agenda, that by reading it I would be uplifted out of this kind of melancholy or sense of aloneness or abandonment that would reveal itself when I was alone, in solitude, somehow, at home, on my own, not much, nothing to do, no social interaction in those moments. Oh, yes, this kind of desolation would arise. And it was very subtle. And then the doing that arose out of that, which was the reading of the book, taking the book, reading it, was a hope, really, or a desire to change my state, an avoidance of this. So the pause is important prior to doing, and sometimes we are required to actually pause. So if there's a busy day, or there's a lot of work, or you have a life that there is a lot of interaction in that way, and tasks and commitments, to actually make that pause, to take that pause. So we start to listen from inner silence, and perhaps move from inner silence. And then being and doing are not in opposition to each other, because there can be a lot of activity in the worldly sense, but there is no inner division. This allows the sense of doership to come undone.